Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's Debbie, and have you used a CGM before? CGM is continuous glucose monitor, and there's different options out there. Ideally, you can get it from your doctor, but they seem to just want to wait until you're type 2 diabetic and not be preventative. I would like us to take ownership of our health and make choices now to prevent having high, low glucose readings and optimize your health from the inside out by testing and not guessing. And that includes a CGM that goes on for 14 days, and you can order one via NutriSense. And a CGM is giving you glucose updates with a small device in the back of your arm 24/7. Totally easy. I actually did a video on my YouTube channel, Low Carb Athlete, how to apply this CGM. First time, kind of scared, but it doesn't hurt. But it gives you real-time glucose readings. Glucose response to meals. You'll learn about what foods are reactive to you, and that could be a healthy food that you think is great, but it could raise your glucose. Simple things as stevia, for me, raise my glucose. Chewing gum, raise my glucose. Stress, when I'm driving a car and there's traffic, raises my glucose. Every stress response is a glucose response. So learn how to manage your stress. Learn how to pick right foods for you, unless you can, do other lab testing and figure out Vibrant Wellness food zoomers, but it's kind of expensive for people. So if you can wear a CGM, it's a great way to learn about stress, food, exercise, stacking movement with your nutrition. Figure out how to balance your blood sugar. So we want to learn more about how to exercise and eat or not eat. And morning cortisol, does it raise your glucose? If there's hidden stressors at nighttime, does your glucose go up higher while you're sleeping? So it gives us lots of clues that we can put in our investigation when we are working on your personalized fueling, training, and performance program to improve fat loss, performance, and longevity. So head to NutriSense website, nutrisense.io, how it works. You can learn more about your habits, your routines, your relationship to food, a little bit more. Great app to use, and it can sync on to different programs. So you can put it all together. So if you want to get started with your journey in NutriSense, I suggest this to all my clients. Use at least 30 days. So you can do a 30-day, 90-day, different programs, but you can pick which one you want. You get the sensor in the mail, put it on, lasts for 14 days, sync it to the app, and get your readings on there. And then if you're doing my VIP coaching program, I'm working with you to correlate this data together. So begin your health optimization journey with NutriSense, and you can save on your order with our code, as usual, Low Carb Athlete. So no carbs is not our goal, it's carb timing, and using NutriSense, you can help figure out your nutrient-dense whole food plan and when to adjust your macros based on your exercise intensity, duration, based on your life stressors, and learn more. So it's nice to have this data. So test and not guess with NutriSense. Let me know how you like it. Hey guys, it's Debbie Potts, and I have a little bit of allergies today, so I'm croaky, but I wanted to get a little intro for our guest today. I finally get to talk to Dr. Mikki Wilden, and we have talked over the years. She actually was at my Fat Adapted Athlete seminar conference I put on at Ironman Hawaii in 2018 with some other great speakers in our endurance world. And I am finally talking to her today. She is a wealth of knowledge in our endurance world. She's got a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition, Bachelor of Physical Education,
from New Zealand, and she's obtained her Master's of Science Human Nutrition First Class Honors in 2003. She focused on the development of childhood obesity prevention and programming in her master's, which is pretty amazing. We need more of that. And she's a registered nutritionist. She's been privately consulting clients since 2006, and she's worked with a number of people with different health and performance goals because we are all unique. And then in 2011, she obtained her PhD after completing her doctoral thesis in health and productivity in the New Zealand workforce. She spent several years in the academic environment working on research products related to low-carb, high-fat diets, which brings her to our conversation today, talking about the metabolically flexible fat. Do we say fat adapted anymore? It's more about being metabolically efficient, metabolically flexible, that you have the ability to switch back to fat as your main fuel source, be able to switch to carbs when you need that carb burning engine, and then switch back to your fat burning engine where we are most of the time if we are metabolically healthy. And how we fuel day to day, how do we fuel around our workouts, and how do we train, and how do we race, and how do you match your fueling to your training? And then it's a little different on race day, but also depends on your goals. Are your goals for a race just to finish, or are you trying to place in your age group? So much of figuring out a client's fueling training performance program is it depends, because there's so much to it. And I, of course, like to look at their metabolic efficiency. If they could do a resting metabolism test, an active metabolism test, if we can look at blood chemistry markers, you can ask your doctor and get the rest on my link on Alta Health or Rupa Health and see what your liver enzymes are and your markers for your metabolic health, looking at your vitamin D, looking at your CRP inflammation markers, looking at insulin. A lot of this stuff our insurance isn't covering when we go see our doctor for annual checkup. And really, we want to get this blood chemistry panel done every, I say 4 months, 4 to 6 months. That's just twice a year, but maybe 3 times a year would be great. And then figure out what we need to do to get everything to optimal ranges. I know a lot of the labs that you look at the results, you think you're normal, but that is normal, not optimal. So when we are talking about metabolic health, and Dr. Mikki is going to talk about nutrition and fueling, we want to look at the client's current status. Are you efficient at using fat for fuel and carbohydrates, and your metabolism is good? Do we have areas of opportunity? What are your metabolic health markers? As I said, the insulin, but A1C, your fasted glucose. How is your glucose? If you've worn CGM for 14-day cycle, do it for 2 to 3 months to really see how your body reacts to stress, to nutrition, to your exercise, to different times of the day, and learning how well you can keep your glucose in balance. So we want to look at all that data when we figure out how should you best fuel. So Dr. Mikki and I are talking about current research and looking at the company she started working for recently with S Fuels, and looking at different 5 training zones and matching that training with the fueling. So we kind of have a different conversation. I think we need to do a follow-up and go into specific topics. We did agree we need to go into just an episode on protein, as that's a big topic lately, and muscle health and muscle protein synthesis and recovery and repair. So you can listen to Dr. Mikki's own podcast. She does a podcast episode out 2 times a week called Mikkipedia. And I just started listening to it, not realizing that was her. I just was listening to different episodes on specific topics. But she dives into topics on nutrition, longevity, fitness, and health, as I do on this show. She's now the director of nutrition for S Fuels, which is an innovative sports nutrition company that also works with Deanne Plews from EndureIQ. Mikki is the creator of Mondays Matter, a fat loss group program that utilizes evidence-based techniques to help thousands of people support their body composition goals, alongside personal consultations and monthly meal plans to support her clients' individuals' health goals. So check out MikkiWilliden.com. All the links will be in the show notes. So enjoy our conversation, and please let us know what you want us to dive into a little deeper on our next conversation. Thanks for listening and sharing.
Hey, it's Debbie, and I am going to talk today to Dr. Mikki about fueling for training and racing at various intensities. So we talk about the 5 zones. We got zone 1, zone 2 is more slow, not slow, but long distance, long sustained distance. Zone 3, more of our tempo. Zone 4, more of our HIIT training, speed work. And zone 5, more our short, intense intervals. And zone 1 would be a recovery in between those intervals. So we're going to talk about fueling strategies. S Fuels has a new lineup of their fueling that I was really curious about, looking at the different intensities, what fuel source you are using, and how you can use real nutrition to fuel in and around those workouts. When should you add in? So how to train. Do you need fuel? Should you fast? Women versus men, endurance training versus heavy lifting versus sprint interval training, HIIT training, all that I want to dive into. So aerobic, long, slow distance, long sustained distance. Hate to say slow, but long sustained distance. Zone 2, tempo, high intensity intervals, more zone 3 and 4. Fat oxidation, how do we improve that? Do we add in caffeine? So I wanted to dive into the science behind S Fuels, as well as understanding right fuel, right time. And as I do metabolic testing, figuring what that is. So let's bring on Dr. Mikki and learn more. You can see. All right. Finally, I'm talking to Dr. Mikki. She is the nutrition guru, and she's going to help us figure out how best to fuel based on various intensities, type of workout, duration. And as I do metabolic testing and been in the endurance athlete world for, what year is it? 24. So 25 years. I think it's really a great conversation. So Mikki, thanks for coming on and making the time for me today to dive into our favorite topics.
Debbie, thank you so much for having me. I am really honored to be chatting to you today. Like, you are such a wealth of information yourself with everything that you do. And I've also followed you and your work for years. So it's nice. And we've been meaning to do something like this for a few years. And I'm so pleased that we've finally got it together.
I know, you mentioned Paul Larson. That was 2019 when I organized the Fat Adapted Athlete at Ironman Hawaii.
That's right. And do you know what, Debbie, because I go to Hawaii most years to go to the sports medicine conference.
Oh, that's right.
Always in the hope that there'll be some conversation around the topics that you and I are passionate about, fueling the athlete, but also the healthy athlete, performing at their best in the best possible way. But I guess it is sponsored by Gatorade. So it was really lovely to go along in 2019 to your event and just hear some like minds on this topic.
Yeah, so we've been working at it a long time and still trying to get the message out there. If you are an endurance athlete, the preferred fuel source should be fat and not needing as many carbohydrates as we hear out there. But it's not that carbs are bad. We keep talking about strategic carbohydrate and nutrient timing and eating real food, right? So let's talk a little bit about you and what your passion is, and what do you feel like your purpose is here in our industry?
Yeah, lovely, Debbie. Well, it's funny you sort of did a little year check on how long you've been working in the endurance space and an endurance athlete yourself, and we're sort of along the same trajectory, if you like. So I've been a clinician for about 25 years and have been an endurance athlete for probably as long. Began running as a teenager. And then had, a few blips along the way in my early 20s, but really sort of solidified this love of endurance sport and helping endurance athletes. What I think is super interesting actually in my studies. So I studied at University of Otago. I did a science degree and then did my master's in nutrition, and then went on to do a PhD, was my colleagues and I would go to nutrition conferences, and there would be people presenting on sports nutrition, and they would bring up these sports nutrition recommendations of what we should be telling our athletes that they need to be consuming if they're exercising, for example, 2 hours or more a day. Those kind of recommendations, those quite conventional ones. And it almost felt like a dirty secret amongst all of us who were, in fact, working with clients, that we would sit there and go, but we like secretly would be like, oh my God, if I told my endurance athletes to eat that they would gain so much weight. Like they really would. And there'd just be no room in their diet for all of the other super important nutrients, the ones that we know are so important for physiology and fat oxidation and reducing inflammation and those kind of things. And I think it's really telling as well that if you look at the habitual diet of an athlete, their carbohydrate requirement, the top of the top, is around 5 or 6 grams per kg per day is what they actually take in, despite the fact they might be recommended, 8 to 10 grams per kg body weight. Of course, you will have those athletes. You'll absolutely have there are those elite, genetic, amazing athletes that we love that really are quite different to the rest of us, I think. And so I'm really passionate, I guess, to sort of get back to your question, is to help athletes be the best they can be, which encompasses being as healthy as they can be as well. I think you and I are very similar to that.
Yeah, and I always add healthy from the inside out, because we talk about gut health and why there's glutamine and S fuels products we can get into, but just how important eating the right foods to be healthy. And as an athlete, we are fit and active, but we're not always healthy inside, as the microbiome and leaky gut issues and all that. So that's what I've been trying to get across. Like, just because you're exercising all this and training for Ironmans or whatever sport you're doing doesn't mean you're actually invincible.
No, I agree. And I do come across, there are a number of, I guess, different sort of avatars or phenotypes, but you absolutely get those athletes who are very lean, and their body fat or body composition isn't necessarily a concern for them. So in their mind, they can eat what they like and quote unquote get away with it. And then of course you've got the another phenotype which might feel the way that they're told to feel, but actually really struggle with weight gain. And despite the fact that they might even be eating less calories than what you would expect, given how many they're expending, they still struggle to maintain a good body composition. And both of these avatars, I feel, are problematic, because the very lean individual is, as you say, they might look lean, but on the inside, the oxidation and damage might not be catching up with them yet. But in years down the track, I think that, we know that can be a concern, particularly in middle-aged athletes, with regards to blood sugar management. You mentioned gut-related issues. But then the other individual, they really struggle to sort of fuel appropriately and feel good whilst they're training. So, of course, there are other phenotypes that do endurance training, but these are, two really common ones that I see.
I think I got into this so many years ago because of observing myself and other athletes, how we're doing all this high volume training and people are still fat.
Yeah.
They're not losing weight. You think if it is, 3,500 calories loss equals 1 pound loss, that we would all be just svelte and lean and really not struggling with weight. But I found years ago that so many people were training, but we're not changing our body composition and we're not actually losing weight. And a lot of people are heavier athletes, not, criticizing, but it's just they're trying to do all the right things, but they can't figure out what to do. And that's why I try to help people on this podcast to figure out, okay, you're trying to eat right, whatever right is. You're trying to do maybe fasted workouts and maybe they're backfiring. Maybe you are trying to do more training and you're still struggling with your weight. And so I guess that's a good way to start into the conversation of
people that are training for endurance events, how should they fuel without, how should we train and fuel to improve our fat oxidation?
Yeah, such a great question, Debbie. And I really loved the research that came out a couple of years ago from Jeff Rothschild, and who looked at the impact that different foods had on your ability to burn fat as a fuel source as an athlete. And it is really important for the endurance-based athlete to be able to burn fat. And I know that you and I will know, and I'm sure your listeners know as well, is that the people that really succeed in these endurance events aren't the ones that speed up towards the end of the race necessarily, but they just are able to maintain their pace and not slow down. And they have few gastric issues, which of course is a big concern with the endurance-based population as well. So being able to utilize your body's own fuel stores, when even the leanest athlete might have enough to run, I don't know, 4 or 5 back-to-back marathons is often the figure thrown around. But being able to tap into that is another story. So as an endurance athlete, you want to make the most of sessions which are lower intensity, that you can go for an extended period of time and upregulate those enzymes that allow you to burn fat, because these are really important endurance adaptations. Whereas if you are an athlete who is really new to this or new to this way of thinking, and you're always going in with glucose on board, then you miss that opportunity to upregulate AMPK enzymes and other enzymes that are important for endurance performance. So for longer, slower training in that sort of zone 2 or even zone 3, starting with a protein fat load, it doesn't have to be like huge amounts of calories, but starting with protein and fat will allow for that adaptation to occur, or that process to occur throughout training. So that is one of the first things which I like to chat to athletes about. And it isn't necessarily always, it's not fasted training either. There's a place for fasted training, absolutely. But I think as an athlete, we do run the risk of not being able to get in enough of the protein we need across a day. If we're spending hours out on the bike, for example, actually getting in the calories that we still need can be pretty difficult. But I think it's either utilizing some fasted training, but with those longer sessions, using protein and fat pre-training to allow for that adaptation to occur. And what I would also, and I know you haven't asked about during nutrition throughout these sessions, but I might as well just go into that since I'm on the topic. Is what I generally recommend that people do is sort of go on water and electrolytes as required for the first sort of 60 to 120 minutes, depending on the athlete, and then take on board fuel as their caloric requirements sort of dictate. So because I think there is a danger that people hear something like they shouldn't have carbohydrate, and then they go out and do subsequent, 5 hours of fasted training sessions every weekend, and then wonder why they're unable to recover, or in those kind of things.
Yeah. So let me back up, just in case people don't know what definition of fat oxidation, what would you say that is? How to explain that?
Yeah. So you have more than just 2 fuel sources, but your primary fuel sources are glucose from carbohydrate and fat from your ability to sort of burn fatty acids. And typically speaking, we burn predominantly more fat, or we should, at a lower intensity. So and even if you think about us walking around, not really doing much, we should really be utilizing more sort of fat as a fuel source to sort of fuel our everyday sort of activity. And then as intensity increases, our ability to burn fat or our body requires more. It's easier for our body to burn carbohydrate, if you like. So if you're thinking about a training session where you start out at lower intensity, ideally your body would be burning more fat. Then as the intensity increases, your body sort of switches fuel sources. No, that's not true. Your body prefers to burn more carbohydrate at that higher given intensity. This is what we understood was sort of fuel oxidation or fuel substrate sort of usage, if you like. And that's what I learned when I did my phys degree. But Debbie, things change as well. So more recent research shows that athletes who have better fat oxidation pathways, who are better at burning fat, can actually burn a lot more fat at those higher intensities than what we used to think. So we used to sort of think that at about sort of 60% or a little bit above VO2 max, our body would just prefer to burn more carbohydrate. Whereas athletes that are better fat adapted, now we know that they can burn more fat up to about 85% of their VO2 max. But we are burning, just to clarify, we are burning both fat and carbohydrate sort of all of the time. So it's not like we switch between the two. Like, that's not how the body works. They're just sort of there in the background.
Yeah. So let me just share, because I think that's a good point. I share my screen for people watching the video, but this is a metabolic test that I just recently did. And just to give an example of fuel source that you can see, well, this dip here is because he tied their shoe, but just how the gold color is fat and then carbohydrates, but how you're burning, it's not that you're not burning any carbohydrates, as you're saying, right? So you're burning. Yeah. And then at some point we have this metabolic crossover point that I had, where is it? This is just an article.
There you go.
Your IQ, but this is a great example of right fuel, right time, and training that fat oxidation rate, percentage of fat and carbohydrate, but how you are burning some carbohydrate, some fat. And this is how, when I do testing, how we figure out your metabolic zones, your training zones. So zone 2 is in Pinoe that I use, it would be your peak fat burning. So where is this person burning the most amount of fat? And where is their metabolic crossover point? And that would be their zone 2, and zone 5 would be towards their peak. Yeah. So we figure out based on their breath frequencies what fuel source they probably are using. And you can see here their purple is a carbohydrate. So is that, what do you do for testing to figure out people? Because their zone 2 is such a big thing. Everyone's talking about zone 2 and zone 4, zone 5. Do you suggest testing to figure out what exactly it is and figure out their fuel sourcing from there, the nutrition?
Yeah, if people have access to a laboratory or a clinic where they're able to do it, then that's awesome. And they have the resources to test. Yeah. I absolutely do. I do think a good field test is, can you just go out and run fasted or ride fasted for, 2+ hours, or if it's riding, sort of 3+ hours, and maintain, a consistent heart rate and not feel like you're quote unquote bonking. Like, that is quite a good field test for people. I also think, Debbie, it's worth, people who listen to your show will probably know this, but people assume that as humans we are metabolically flexible. We're born metabolically flexible, is what I've heard people say. So we don't need to worry about our ability to burn fat. The thing is that this ignores the inputs. And so when you're in an environment where if you are running predominantly on carbohydrate, you have a higher carbohydrate diet, you don't have enough habitual fat in your diet, which is a sort of precursor to being a good fat burner, is having sort of dietary fat. If you are highly stressed, if you are you're sort of under recovered, all of these things impact on your ability to burn fat and can suppress fat oxidation. And when I was working at AUT University, we would get endurance athletes in the lab and we would test their metabolic efficiency, and we would see that right from the get-go, even at low intensities, they were sugar burners. So they had very little ability to burn fat. And as you'll know with your athletes, and of course yourself, you can absolutely train that to sort of switch and be a much better fat burner. But I just, I think that when you hear someone say that, we are born metabolically flexible, they just haven't really addressed those inputs, which really impact on that for the individual.
So do you find, because I've seen this with some tests, that some people just they don't burn fat very well. They're really inefficient. But there are also some people, I've had lean athletes that are doing that. And then I look at metabolic health markers, look at their insulin, look at their thyroid panel, but look at their blood sugar panel markers and see any correlation, but also look at what are you eating all day? Do you have to eat every 2 hours, and look at, putting all that together rather than just looking at this test itself. But we want to know more clues to help someone figure out how you can be metabolically efficient. And you're saying metabolically flexible, which means to you, what does that mean? Burning fat, switching to carbs, switching back and forth?
Yeah, the ability to switch between both. Like, I feel like it's almost the pathway seems for people who are sort of just sugar burners. We're like, right, let's get you metabolically efficient so you're able to burn fat, and let's then work on flexibility. So ultimately, you want to be able to burn both carbohydrate and fat as required. And I think this is important even for the insulin sensitive athlete, the athlete that has really good health markers, because I'm not just thinking about the athlete in front of me, I'm thinking about their future sort of career and their ability to stay in the sport that they love for decades, and I feel like that's a really important piece of being an athlete as well. So, and I can see you're on the same page with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think it's what you're doing now. What I keep saying in every show is that as I get older, and I'm 52 somehow now, that I'm looking at my parents. My dad passed away, and after 80, what happens? And I'm reading research on oxidative stress and all this stuff on exercise. But a lot of the positive parts of exercise that we read about, the positive benefits, are moderate exercise, 45 minutes, not this excessive exercise that is that Goldilocks effect. Here's the right dose of exercise, sedentary, and then there's us over here.
Yes.
Doing a lot of that. We have to fine tune everything, but
and that's why the micronutrients are so important as well, Debbie. Like, we have these conversations about fat and carbohydrate, and of course is absolutely key, but it's the micronutrients which are so important to help reduce inflammation, to help sort of sequester and reduce those free radicals that are created by the oxidative stress and damage. So diet quality is so important for the athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's dive into organize this, the 5 zones that we talk about, and you're working with S fuels. What fuel source are we using during exercise? And then let's figure out nutrition outside of exercise to help us do that. And then we'll get into how to fuel during exercise. So what are the fuel sources in the different intensity zones that we're talking about, those 5 zones that you talk about?
Yeah, nice one. So zone 2, which is sort of your classic aerobic base, right? And as an athlete, we require that really robust aerobic base that we can go for hours and hours, essentially. And that also requires us to be efficient fat burners too, because as I said earlier, we have thousands of calories that we can utilize as a fuel source if only we're able to sort of tap into them. So at S Fuels, we've got our Zone 2 product. It doesn't use any sugar or carbohydrate because it really wants to enhance that fat, that ability to burn fat. So it's got what we call our extended substrate in it. So it's got a fusion of select medium chain triglyceride fatty acids, which we can go into in a minute, and glutamine as a fuel substrate. Now, I'm sure you and your listeners are familiar with MCTs, Debbie.
Yeah, we'll give a little review if people are newer.
Yeah,
might not know, since that was 10 years ago. The conversation, I was talking about it.
Yeah, sure thing. So medium chain triglycerides are a type of fatty acid which are short chained fatty acids, if you like, or MCT medium, actually, not short. That's probably a better description. But essentially their unique properties is that they are unable to be stored in the body. So they're actually a ready available fuel source. And the ones that the S Fuels extended substrate has in it is there are a range of different MCTs from sort of C8 to C12, and we've got C8 and C10. So these are 2 types of MCTs, and they are caprylic acid C8 and decanoic acid C10, which don't require a lot of time being processed in the liver, which means that they're quick to be utilized as a fuel source. And so they're easy to absorb, and they do provide sort of efficient energy in the absence of any sort of glucose. So that's why we've got those MCTs in there. And we also know as well that MCTs help enhance the body's ability to produce ketones and burn fat itself. So not only are you getting some fuel from the extended substrate, it's actually enhancing your body's ability to utilize fat itself and start sort of really honing in on those fat oxidation pathways. Mm-hmm. And we also have glutamine in there as well. And you mentioned glutamine earlier as an amino acid that has long been used related to gut health, and particularly in the more natural medicine area, like naturopaths often recommend it as an amino acid to consume when you have gut-related issues. So glutamine, the gut's really greedy for glutamine, and we know that it helps sort of build that robust gut barrier. So it just helps reduce, or preclinical trials will suggest that it can help reduce gut-related distress and just help enhance that gut barrier. So it's pretty, it's emerging research for sure, but we're pretty excited to have it in that zone 2, not only the zone 2 product, but as, you know, the major component of our extended substrate.
Have you ever dove into leaky gut with athletes of the why, how part of it? And
yeah, a bit. Yeah. And it's super interesting because, you know, I think is the stat something like 86% of endurance athletes will experience GI issues. But of course, what you're referring to is that much more sort of inflamed gut where they have, gut related issues both in training and out of training, because training itself impacts on intestinal permeability of the gut. And a lot of the sort of overtraining, and that's a really good sign of overtraining too. So there are a lot of factors that go in, and fueling properly is definitely helpful for the athlete.
Well, that's why I really love S Fuels, and you know, we're not trying to sell it so much as educate people today, but just how important it is to pick quality fuel sources to help your performance in training and racing. So again, you're working on your future self and not causing more damage than good, because obviously we said training long distance isn't good all the time. You know, there's that Goldilocks effect of how much is a great dose of exercise, but the fueling and the stuff we put on our body, the excess sugar. So going back to the fuel sources used, where you said we're burning some carbohydrates, let's kind of go into strategic carb timing. And I know Dr. Dan Plews talking in the Endure IQ program of timing that carbohydrate, not having carbs before you work out. So if we can talk anything about pre-workout, the meal before, during, you know, he talks a lot about, you know, adding in a little bit of carbs during that workout at various intensities.
Yeah, nice. So if we're thinking about pre-exercise.
So
hello?
Oh yeah. Can you see this chart?
Yeah.
Does that kind of, I always think this is beneficial to explain. I don't know if you want to touch this now, but.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. So as, you know, we talked a little bit about the sort of building fat oxidation pathways earlier. And so for that sort of zone 2 based training in those extended sessions, having protein and fat before a training session, and it's really individual as to how, I mean, clinically speaking, like how soon an athlete can eat and then go out and train. You know, I've got athletes who can eat, you know, half an hour. I'm one of these people. I can eat half an hour, 45 minutes before, and then go out, not a lot of food, but I might have like an S Fuels Life bar, or I might have a protein bar or a protein shake, depending on sort of what I feel like. And then I can go out and do like, I don't know, a 2-hour run at a reasonable intensity and feel good. But then I also have athletes who can't consume anything sort of 4 hours before a run. So for them, it's a little bit more challenging. But regardless of what you do, I think for the lower intensity, long endurance, I think starting with the protein and or fat is a really good as a really good base to then build on that fat oxidation throughout that session.
Would that be going back to why? I always think why can't you eat 4 hours beforehand? Is it because they have digestion issues?
Yeah, basically.
Mm.
Yeah. And so that's like I also have athletes who can't eat anything that like in the morning before they train, and they have to train in the morning before work or before other sort of life gets in the way, if you like. So for those athletes, we just make sure that they are well fueled from dinner the night before, and then that they get in that post exercise fueling immediately sort of post session. And timing becomes a factor if you are compromised in one of those sort of areas. That's when timing is a factor. If you're not compromised, timing is less important, depending on exercise frequency and things like that.
Now, what type of protein, if you're working out in the morning, easy to digest? Like, I'm not going to eat meat for me.
No.
Digest it. So what would you suggest, like pre-workout?
Yeah. I generally think like a protein shake, if, even just protein in water is super easy, or in unsweetened almond milk. Some people can actually like mix protein powder into like a low lactose, low sugar yogurt, which is still pretty absent of like there are yogurts out there with very little carbohydrate in them. There are some that have the lactose, milk, sugar. So you avoid them, but that's generally sort of my go-to, if you like. And of course, at S Fuels, we've got the S Fuels Life Bar. So that's, I really like that it sort of sits quite easily for some people.
Yeah. So pre-workout, when we should think about eating beforehand versus a fasted workout, and then men versus women. If you listen to what Dr. Stacy Sims suggests for women, what have you learned? Anything in that area, or any ideas, thoughts on pre-workout if it's early?
Nothing different from what I've already said. So, because
but like a female versus man, I guess, is my specific.
Yeah, nothing different from what I've already said. Yeah, like there's what we've already discussed. What I'll start with is that fueling. There's no difference between a woman's ability to digest food compared to a man's, and that is an individual factor. The time of, if they've got the time to fuel versus not time to fuel, getting a quick protein drink with water, like that's pretty easy to get, or making sure you're well fueled the night before, like that's not different for a man versus a woman. So what specifically do you have a question about with that? Because I might be able to answer it better.
Women, I know I wasn't specific, but women versus men, I'll take this off, go back to that screen, but the women that as we get older, we need a little something to help oxidize more fat, versus men are better doing it fasted and just make sure you get enough through dinner. So that's always a big debate the last 5 years, I think, is fasted or fed workout. If I'm going to get up and go, it's 5:30 in the morning workout, am I going to, I guess to me, it's like, is it a zone 2 workout or is it HIIT training? Do I need some fuel to improve my performance? But do I need some fuel, is what I've heard Stacy Sims say about, I need some carbs on board to help activate fat burning.
Yeah, I don't know the science. I don't think that's what the science shows necessarily, about that we need carbs to burn fat. Like that, actually, I learned that when I was in nutrition. We used to think that fat burnt in a carbohydrate flame is what we said.
That's right.
Yeah, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think what I said probably covers it, like with regards to having something small beforehand. And I think the important thing for females, or for anyone, but particularly females, is just it's the low energy availability. And I think that's where the conversation sort of needs to be, is we need to make sure all your nutrient bases are covered and you're getting enough fuel across the day. And so you can still get that if, let's say, you, Debbie, had terrible stomach issues, there's no way that you could eat anything before a training session, then we would make sure that you were really good at sort of post-workout and then getting in those calories through the day. And I think probably what Stacey often sees is women who start fasted and then go for extended periods without eating.
Yes.
Because I see that too all of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But but
keep going.
Yeah, I just like women have now become scared of sort of doing anything that might spike cortisol. But if I see the research on cortisol, men have higher cortisol than women in the morning too. So, there's just a whole bunch of, I think it can be simple. It doesn't have to be sort of particular, is what the research is also showing.
Yeah, and that's what just reinforces that we can't just have one size fits all approach. We need personalized coaching, that we can't just say everyone fuel this way, that we need to work with that person. This person can't eat 4 hours before. This person can eat. I mean, that's why we always N equals 1 that we always go back to. It depends, because you are unique.
Yes. And I'll also say, like when we were talking through zone 2 sort of exercises, which is what we were discussing. And then you mentioned higher intensity training.
Yeah.
100%. That's an opportunity for strategic carbohydrate. That's when you get in your 30 grams of carbohydrate, 30 to 60 minutes before training. So whenever you're going into a highly glycolytic session, performance is the sort of factor that you're most concerned with, then we get in some carbohydrate there for sure. So that's that right fuel, right time approach.
So that's a good transition. I know I'm going all over, so people are
No, it's fine.
But the zone 2, we talked about that. So here's example of zone 2 fueling. So we'll get back on track. So zone 2, we're talking about long sustained distance. That's where you're burning more fat. Should we eat if we're going 2 hours or more? How much should you eat? So we can go back to the person, if we're personalizing someone's coaching program, say, hey, this is your endurance. You are in zone 2. 1 hour before, try experimenting the right dose for you, proteins and healthy fats.
Yeah.
Doing fat burning, your high fat oxidation, hopefully, if not, you're fueling that way. Yeah. Right. And then you don't need, so there's not carbs in this formula. Yeah. And then how long should we go? I think you should listen to your body and use your own intuition when you should add in calories, if you're going, say, 1.5 hours or longer, or 2 hours.
I think sort of, again, listen to your body, and if there are athletes that are new to this, they'll probably require fuel earlier than athletes who are really well fat adapted. But I think, 2 hours plus, then getting in either some, depending on what the session looks like, protein and fat-based fuel, or if they are practicing sort of race nutrition tactics, then maybe they're bringing in some carbohydrate at that sort of later part as well. So it's quite individual as to what the athlete does. But I think calories this is the thing, like when we talk about fat adaptation, it's not about no calories, which obviously zone 2, I mean, there's obviously calories in zone 2, but it's just about getting the right kind of calories. And so I like putting in either some S-Fuels Life Bar, that's quite a good one, particularly if you feel hungry, or moving into some of the Zone 4 product and having some carbohydrate on board too.
Okay, so the S-Fuels new, I just want to do a show on this because I think it's so fascinating. Brilliant is a better word. Zone 2 training, how I'm doing a zone 2 training, I'm staying that fat oxidation so we can go, okay, test it. I know these training zones, I burn the most fat. So that's where I'm doing my training. Go back to how I should fuel for that. If I'm doing a 2, 3, 4 hour bike ride, I'm going to drink this. How much electrolytes? Do we need to add more in there?
Yeah, I think this is really individual as well, to be honest. And there are people who are sodium deniers, and then those sodium deniers would call us fiction. What we're talking in fiction when we're talking about sodium. I think it's really quite individual. There are athletes who do not require additional electrolytes over and above what they might find in S-Fuels Zone 2. But then there are athletes that might require a bit more. So understanding your own electrolyte requirements, I think, is important to get in the right amount. I mean, does have quite good amounts of sodium compared to, say, your average sports drink, if you like. There's 240 milligrams.
I was going to read it.
Yeah. In that product, which is pretty decent, really. But some people prefer more, and even if it's just it allows them to it makes them, it doesn't upset their gut, then that's fine. And that's actually the major way to understand if you're getting in enough sodium or too much sodium is if you start having some GI issues, then that's when you want to back off a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you have cramping if you have too much sodium, or are you just going to be just covered in salt if you have too much? How do you know?
No, actually, it's a great question, actually. And I spoke to someone about sodium a few weeks ago on my podcast, and having a lot of, because I used to think that when you sweated out a lot of sodium, it just meant your body was excreting what you didn't need, which in fact isn't correct. I think cramping might be this is where the literature doesn't agree with me, but clinically speaking, what I see in athletes is if you're cramping, I think you need more sodium, actually. You will go to the literature and it will not tell you that. The literature will tell you it's an electrical issue in the muscle, that it could well be, and it could well be that your training intensity or your racing intensity is well higher than what you're used to. That's another really good sign of a really good reason for cramping. But I also know that athletes can resolve cramps if they push their sodium higher than even what the literature would say. And that's just a limitation of science, actually, Debbie. That's understanding the science, but also working with the individual in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I have a hard time with research, because it's just, we're not all the same. So let's just figure it out for ourselves. So,
Yes.
okay, so now we're going to add in some race pace, or we're going to do race, or I'm going to do more HIIT training, because I need, as I age as a female, especially less zone 2, I need more intervals. So I've done zone 2 forever. That's fine. I'm getting slower. I want to burn more calories. I want more speed and power. So I'm trying to do more training up here, but I need to fuel for it to improve performance. Or often if we're doing this without the right fuel on board, our performance may be lagging. Yeah. So talk about this fuel in zone 4. What's going on in zone 4?
Yeah, amazing. So zone 4 has a formulation of using both the S-Fuels extended substrate, which we talked about before, but it also has something called cluster dextrin and maltodextrin as well. So cluster dextrin, your listeners may be familiar with the idea of dextrin. It's a highly branched cyclic dextrin. So it's a type of carbohydrate supplement which is derived from cornstarch, and it is it provides a fast but sustained release of energy. So it's rapidly absorbed in the stomach, but then it's gradually released into the bloodstream, almost like sort of not quite drip feeding glucose, but what we want to do with the higher intensity exercise is we want to maintain the glucose level in the bloodstream to use as a fuel source. So something like the cluster dextrin allows that to occur because it's rapidly absorbed, but then it's gradually sort of released into the bloodstream. So, and the idea with anything like the highly branched cyclic dextrin is to reduce the GI discomfort that can occur if you're just doing sort of a HIIT sort of bolus of 30 grams of carbohydrate that's just rapidly sort of being dumped into your system.
So question on that cornstarch, what if you're celiac? Have you done any research if it's cross-reactive with gluten? Having that corn?
I haven't personally done that research, but that's definitely something to consider if you have an allergy to corn, or if you have any cross-reactivity, then that is a consideration for sure.
Yeah, because I was doing research, because I do have a couple athletes that are celiac, and then I do functional lab testing in the wheat zoomer, and everyone's reactive to wheat. So I'm always curious, like, okay, what type, because I was looking this up the other day, that maltodextrin is a part of Summit or wheat, but you can get different forms of maltodextrin where it's coming from, if it's corn or tapioca or other sources. So I'm always looking at as reactive to wheat, would this cause issues?
Well, I wouldn't know, to be honest. I can't answer that. Sorry, Debbie, I haven't done the research on that one.
I just always wondering. So
this
is when you're burning. So let me go back to my metabolic test. So this is a good example of when we get that metabolic crossover point. So you're this is blue. They're about here, they're going to burn more. This is carbohydrates, this is fats going down. So this is where we start to see where the zone 3 for this person would be, zone 4 up here, zone 5 up here.
Yeah.
So for someone doing a higher intensity, maybe they're doing a 20-minute piece or a 10-minute piece that they're staying up here, come back down to their zone 1, come back up. This would be something that would be a good fuel source to add in that workout.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Anything that's going to really get you into those higher zones of work and it becomes more glycolytic, something like this, I think is great.
Yeah, because I think, well, that's why I'm a big believer. If you can test, find someone locally that can test you, because a lot of people don't have a clue, unless we always did Maffetone 180 minus your age. Where are you burning most fat? Because I test a lot of people that are not really athletes, just trying to be healthy, metabolically healthy, I think is a good point to do these tests. But what is your zone 2? Could be people think they're in zone 2, but they're still burning primarily carbohydrates, not improving their fat. So to improve their fat oxidation, would you, going back, rewinding here, if they're zone 2, you're talking about improving their fat oxidation, improve this fat burn. How would they do that for fueling here and staying more in their zone 2? Or would you work on nutrition? How do you, if someone doesn't burn fat well?
Yeah, both of those things actually, Debbie. So I definitely think that working on your fat. So if you're coming up to like 6 key weeks before your next race, that's not the time necessarily to work on your fat oxidation. So best time to work on it would be during your base phase, or maybe if you have an off season, like that's when you work on your fat oxidation, because you want to train the way that Maffetone sort of talked about. And it's nice. I am with you on sort of Phil Maffetone's work. I think it's great. Where you don't want to stress the body or put your body in a position where it is just needing or requiring that carbohydrate. So being able to stay in zone 2 and do a lot of this low intensity training, in addition to making those diet changes. And there are a few ways to become better at burning fat. Like you can do what Dan Clues talks about in that cold keto phase. So he has, his people who go through his course, he recommends doing sort of 3 weeks of strict keto, and then sort of finding that sweet spot of carbohydrate. Whereas what I tend to do with my athletes is I do that with some people, absolutely, but others, we are just strategic about when we have that carbohydrate. So we certainly go lower carb, but we put the carbohydrate in post-training to help with recovery. But we, of course, avoid the carbohydrate before training to improve their ability to burn fat through the pathways that we've already discussed today. And, there are those, the 4 sort of strategies that help enhance fat oxidation is just being low carb in general. It's also the double training days. So you do like a hard training session and then you do a light training session later on in the day, and you don't put any carbohydrate in between those sessions. So you're in that carbohydrate depleted state, which is what's required to help you become better at burning fat. You can also do a harder session in the afternoon and then have a low carbohydrate dinner, then go to bed and get up and do some either fasted training, like an easy fasted session, because it's always recommended to be an easy session, or put some protein and fat in before training, as we've already discussed. So there's that sort of sleep low approach as well. So there are quite a few different ways to sort of build that fat oxidation, but it primarily comes through sort of lower intensity training where possible, and of course the strategic use of carbohydrate if you're using it in a sort of a more lower carb diet. And you'll know this, and I'm sure your athletes will as well, is that low carb for an athlete looks quite different from low carb on social media, where you see people having, net 20 grams of carbohydrate and that's their carb intake. Like, an athlete can have 120, 130, 150 grams of carbs and still be relatively low carbohydrate, given the amount of work that they actually do.
So with the carb, I want to get to the zone 4 training. And we talked about how you're switching to bring more carbohydrates. And then Dan Plews on his website has lots of good blogs of, how many carbs, because this is always a big debate, how many carbs do we need per hour, and how much you're saying not to have carbohydrates before workout because it will blunt fat oxidation if you're doing zone 2 workout. But what if you're doing HIIT training, you're timing in some of these carbohydrates to improve?
Yeah, you do. And it all comes down to the goal of the session. So you almost can't look at a session as both improving fat oxidation and then working on VO2 max. Like, they are quite different goals. So it always is going to come down to the goal of the session. And then also, having a look at the overall, your overall week. Like, you can still, like, if you have a couple of key sessions where you require carbohydrate to really push those performance parameters, then of course we put carbohydrate in beforehand, and we can support that session with carbohydrate, be it with zone 4 or zone 5, or we have carbohydrate before the session. But across the course of a week, you'll still be doing several hours of training, likely in the zones that allow you to work on fat oxidation as well. So you can do both, but I think the athlete probably, and the coach will be clear, but the athlete needs to be clear about what the goal of the session is as they're going in, so they make good decisions around their fueling. Yeah,
that's where it gets that personalization. So we want the right fuel, right time. If we are going back to this chart, I always love to share with people, if we're doing, say, a VO2 max workout that is a 10 by 1 minute intervals, or it's doing a 4 by 4 workout that you're staying in that zone 4 minutes, recovery 4 minutes, zone 1, then you might want to look at some fueling that's going to be different, as carbs and protein before.
Yeah.
In it says 4 to 24 hours. So that could be the night before dinner, you're saying.
Yeah.
And then 1 hour pre, which is, which depends the time of day you're working out. As we're saying, 6 a.m. I don't want to eat anything. So maybe my coffee has some little something in it. But then during the workout, and then later, if it's a longer workout, which when you're doing these workouts, they shouldn't be long, right?
Yeah, they shouldn't, but they might be something like, you might have like an extended warm up and then you hit into that session, so maybe that's what it looks like. I don't know. I'm not a coach.
I forgot. I haven't done Ironman training for a while, but that's when you're doing your 5-hour ride and you're adding in race pace.
Yeah. It could well be. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the zone 4 workouts to zone 5, talk about these two different fuel sources. High intensity training, zone 5. What's the difference of zone 4 to zone 5? How do we time this? And the carbs, before I forget, and then I'll let you take over. The carbs, we were just talking about the carbohydrates during workout, not before, but was it, maybe touch on too, how much? Because I think Dan said in his program, Dan Plews, that not more than 60 grams of carb per hour. So think about, talk about all that, of what's the right amount.
Yeah, and clinically speaking, I think for most age groupers, I think about 60 grams of carbohydrate, maybe a little bit more, maybe up to 70 is probably adequate and sufficient. To be honest, Debbie, when you're an athlete who has worked on their fat adaptation, who has really gotten good at burning fat, they shouldn't need any more than that sort of 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And the difference between our zone 4 product and the zone 5 is zone 5 brings in fructose, whereas we've avoided fructose up until the zone 5 product, just because there is the potential for gut-related issues with fructose for athletes if you have it too often. And there is some preclinical suggestion that it may reduce or suppress fat oxidation, but that's very early stages research. So I'm not, I just think that the gut-related issues can be a real challenge for some athletes. But we do know that you can fuel with both glucose and fructose in those different pathways, and it provides another fuel source for the athlete. So it really is sort of building in those different fuel pathways for the athlete in that zone 5 product. Whereas the zone 4 product, it has 30 grams of carbohydrate in it. It's great. The zone 5 comes with it, or has in it, the sort of, it's got, I think, 58 grams of carbohydrate in a pouch or something like that. Also,
is this a liquid powder, this one, or gel? The zone 4?
It is. That's a powder, I believe.
Okay. And then this is a gel that you would have. So it's one pouch is 300 calories, and then
and so it's not
50
only got
grams.
those carbohydrates in it, it's also got our extended substrate too. So it's got the MCT and it's got the glutamine as well.
So this would be maltodextrin fructose ratio, 300 calories per serve. I always think, is that New Zealand? I always laugh at Leighton. I always hear the per serve. That's a New Zealand.
Oh, is it? Is it?
Not serving. Funny. I don't know. I always only hear it from you guys, New Zealand people. Per serve. I love it. Per serve in the palm of your hand. So 5 discrete fuel substrate help carbs, fat, and amino acid.
Yeah, and you know, it might come down to the preference of the athlete and what they like taking on board as well.
So if you're going back to our race strategy, so if we're doing a tempo workout, we might use which fuel versus, like, these would all be kind of the same versus VO2 max, and then race day. Talk about what
you might move into using zone 4 or 5 when it comes to sort of race specific training, you know, because as athletes we need to practice our fueling strategy for race day. So I get my athletes to potentially once every 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how far out their races, we choose key sessions in the weekend where they just go through and do a practice run of the nutrition that they're going to use for their race day. And that's when we'll bring in zone 4, zone 5, and get them using that at the same interval that they would for their actual race, which will be for those athletes anywhere between sort of 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And sort of the in between times though, we'll typically use sort of zone 4 for those sort of VO2 max sessions and those anaerobic sort of capacity sessions as well. You need that sort of quick fire sort of carbohydrate.
So going back to, you just to summarize, during later stages of training, this column here. So
that's when you'd bring in the zone 4 or the zone 5.
So what is the dose of carbohydrates? Does that change per intensity?
It's a good question, and it's quite individual. Like because you know that you can get like quite good performance outcomes based on just even carb rinsing alone. You know, where your mouth, you sort of have a small amount of carbohydrate and it elicits a response in the brain that allows you to push harder. So generally speaking, and like I would go for sort of 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate for most athletes in those key performance sessions. But then, of course, as I said, when it comes to practicing race nutrition, I'm going to get them having the full amount that they might expect to have on race day, which might be about that 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour.
And then explain a little bit why we're not having that beforehand. And I don't know if that's really insulin and the planting fat oxidation and the carbohydrate. I think that gets. Sorry? Yeah, just to summarize what we've been saying, the timing of carbohydrate, the dose we were just talking about, but the timing, why you wait later stages of training.
Yeah, nice. So depending on the goal of the session, for any session that's an extended one where you have the opportunity to work on your fat oxidation, that's what you want to do. So in order to do that, we delay putting carbohydrate in until about 90 to 2 hours within that session. And that also means that pre-session, we're going to be having protein and fat. However, if the goal of the session is anaerobic, it's highly glycolytic, and we're up in those higher zones of effort, then we need to fuel that appropriately. So the pre-session is going to be easily digested carbohydrate with a bit of protein maybe. So that might look like, even a protein shake with some fruit or something in it. It might look like yogurt and fruit. I don't know, something like that. Whatever sits well with the athlete. Might be a piece of gluten-free toast and, I don't know, a protein shake. And then we're going to fuel that session with carbohydrate from the get-go. And those sessions are typically shorter than those extended sessions where you have that opportunity to work on your fat oxidation. And as we discussed, it just comes down to everyone knowing what the goal of the session is and fueling that appropriately.
Mm-hmm. So people can learn more on the videos you have on S Fuels And this is a PDF I got from the website, so everyone can grab hold. But I think it's really great presentation they always put together on S Fuels of,
They do amazing.
if you're racing, let me scroll to the top here, using my finger. So this is a great PDF that I think explains it visually.
Yeah.
You're watching the video, but zone 1 recovery, and zone 1's when you're doing these intervals up here. What I keep trying to stress, zone 1 is what you do in between the intervals. They're not staying up there for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm doing whatever the workout is, a 2x20 or whatever, come back to zone 1, then go back up. So this is the revival is good for post-workout.
Yes, and I think a really key thing with the Revival product is it's got beta hydroxybutyrate in it. So it's got a ketone in it, and not just one, but it's got ketones in it, which the most robust research really around ketones for athletes at this point in time is its ability to help with recovery. So not only is it a really quick digested whey powder, which obviously protein is super important when it comes to recovering the muscles post-exercise and repairing the micro tears in the muscles, but the ketones help reduce inflammation. So I love the Revival product for that, and that's my go-to for post-recovery for my athletes.
Mm-hmm. And their bar, I like the bar because I like when I'm going for a long bike ride, say on a Saturday. I need a bar about 2 hours into it. I find like I need like this a quarter piece. I don't ever like a whole bar at once for myself, but I think that's so I'm always going for real food and reading the ingredients and having it clean and not filled with stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And they're great to take out on trail runs and things like that as well, where you're out for a few hours and you need something in your stomach for sure.
And then what's the role of amino acids in this? The amino acids is the glutamine you're speaking about?
Yeah.
That's promoted there. Okay, good. And post-workout, we're talking protein. And I know they have a really good whey shake.
Revival.
We're just going over its Revival and then having that timing. Do you have any preferences on how long to wait? Because I hear different things. Women need to have it 30 minutes. Men can wait up to 3 hours. What's your research or suggestion?
There's no difference in, as I understand it, women versus men. And I think it always comes down to energy availability, opportunity to eat. One thing though is if you are an athlete that has that struggles with gut-related issues, sometimes actually waiting a little bit longer to put anything in your system is actually like a really good idea, because during exercise, your gut basically is not interested in, your body's not interested in helping with digestion. Like your blood flow is going to your muscles.
Sympathetic.
Yeah, totally. So after exercise, you have all these sort of training metabolites and oxidative metabolites running around your system, these inflammatory molecules. And if your body then has to turn its attention to you sculling down, like, I don't know, something, you'll get that blood flow back through to the gut, and it might also include a lot of these inflammatory molecules as well. So sometimes it's better for someone who does have gut-related issues to wait until they are more parasympathetic. So everything is sort of calmed down. And, you know, Debbie, I think the science isn't set on sex-related differences with nutrition. I think the most important thing is for all athletes to listen to their bodies and also be really honest about what their bodies are telling them. And so, because there is I understand the frustration that a lot of experts in our field feel when they see women particularly just not fueling themselves.
Yeah.
And so we come up with these sex-related specifics, but actually there's not a lot of science to show that there's that much difference, but the difference comes down to the individual requirement for nutrition and just being really sensible about it and understanding your body's needs.
Well, that's why I think the intuition is important, going through that, how to figure out your aerobic base, high intensity. I know I have clients female that's trying to lose weight. So they start to not eat anything. And then they're doing 2 hours of tennis practice. For example, one client is doing high intensity anaerobic depleting workout, but we're trying to figure out what to eat. And then she wants to get her protein in, but then wants to fuel for this workout, but they're afraid of carbs because they hear carbs are all bad. But I'm like, you're doing anaerobic workout. And I always find it's Yeah, it's just so different for everyone, but I'm always real food first to figure out what works for that person. So different. So
I agree. And I'll say as well, like if you are an athlete and you are in a calorie deficit to lose weight, then the time you need to fuel around your workout. Like you need to actually nail that in as much as you can, because the time to reduce calories is not around your workout. You want to get the most from that workout. You want to perform really well. And then it's later in the day where you can think about, putting that sort of calorie deficit into place. If there is, you can absolutely do it, but you just have to be smart about it. Most people, when they're wanting to lose weight, they do just what you've talked about. They delay.
Yeah. And I think that's the low energy availability. We're not getting our protein in throughout the day for muscle protein synthesis and stimulate mTOR. And then we get so carb phobic that I wasn't eating any potatoes because we're supposed to avoid starchy carbs.
Yeah.
And then I was eating berries because it's going to spike my glucose up. But it's so funny what's evolved over, 50 years. And for my own journey, my own experimenting for my body based on my workouts and my age and hormones and all that, it's really, I think we need to individualize it, but not be afraid of carbohydrates that are coming from nature and fueling for your workouts as these different examples we showed at various intensities. If you want to improve performance, you may benefit from adding in these different fueling strategies. So
I 100% agree. And you can as athletes, we just want to perform at our best for as long as we can and feel good doing it. And that's why the strategic fueling is so important.
Yeah, I know I went over time on you. Sorry about that. But there's so much to talk about with you because we've just been in this for so long and there's so many great subjects to dive into. So anytime you want to come back on, we can continue. But
amazing. We could spend, that sounds great, Debbie. We could probably spend an hour talking about protein.
No, that's my big focus this year. Our last 4 years, I think, is we were so focused on low carb and keto and nutritional ketosis and burning fat that poor little protein got lost out in the conversation. Now it's all about, I need to hit 40, 50 grams of protein my first and last meal and put that throughout the day, but I'm working out and it make it so complicated. So for sure. That'd be a great topic.
Amazing, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Great info. And where can people learn more and listen to you?
Yeah, amazing. So on social media, my handle is Mikki Williden, just my name. I have a podcast, much like yours, Debbie, called Mikkipedia, where I have experts on. I do little solo episodes as well, but it's all around health, nutrition, longevity. I'm a bit of a geek. I like getting nerdy people on as well. But a lot of it is related to the endurance athlete because I myself am an endurance athlete. I'm really passionate about having good information out there. Or my website, MikkiWilliden.com.
I didn't realize that was your podcast. I was just listening to it. And I was like, oh my God, it was just because I was researching, I forget what topic, but it came up on you. I was like, oh yeah, that's your podcast. It's a great podcast.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Debbie.
I like the name too. It's cute.
Thank you.
So we'll put all that in the show notes. So we'll put all those links and then we'll do more videos and hopefully come back and talk about protein.
That sounds fantastic, Debbie. You have the best day.
You too.
Hey guys, it's Debbie. And if you like what you listen to and you're curious and want to learn more on how you can be a health optimizer and take ownership of your health in the future when you are 70, 80, 90 years old, let's talk. Head to debbiepotts.net and set up a free discovery call with me to learn more about my personalized coaching packages as my health investigation package or my VIP package, where we dive into a program together for 6 months to help learn what you can do to be the best version of yourself.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.